that is China's largest source of this country's carbon emissions. And we're traveling on a train. Hey, why not have a bit of luxury before we get our hands dirty? Coal everywhere, and all of it to burn. Last year, 740 million tons of coal was produced here in Shanxi. That's 23% of China's total coal output last year. Now, it's said that Shanxi, half of the land here, is filled with coal. And China's economy is largely dependent on this fossil fuel, as more than 70% of electricity comes from burning it. To curb their pollution and carbon emissions, mining companies in Shanxi are trying to explore new technologies. I'm here to visit the Jincheng coal mining company. They make money using the CDM mechanism. So look at all this coal. Now that it's out of the ground, you got to start burning it, right? So what could you as a country or a factory do to reduce your impact on carbon emissions? How about buying and selling some carbon credits on the carbon exchange market? Is it time to buy black to go green? The CDM mechanism here uses machines to extract methane during the coal mining process.
煤层气它的主要成分是甲烷，它在煤层中聚集，在煤炭的生产过程中，实际上它是一种有害气体，温室效应是二氧化碳的21倍。
Methane gas is a major cause of death for coal miners who are exposed to it in a confined space. Before the CDM project, Jincheng Coal Company used to burn it or simply pump the methane into the atmosphere. Can you please explain how your coal mine is involved in CDM?
我们是把这个煤层气是输送到电厂，然后用电厂发电利用，然后把它产生的减排量卖给发达国家。我们卖给了世界银行的原型碳基金和日本碳基金。 荷兰清洁发展机制机构和英国 IceCap 公司。
They took me to the area where the gas is collected. Overall, it seemed like a very neat and simple procedure. So what exactly is this here? Well, on this side are different pipes that are linked to different mines around the region. The gas that comes through, the methane gas, is of a different pressure. They have to be equalized in this particular cylinder. Then it gets transported through those pipes into a plant that's just next door, and there it's either liquefied or compressed to be transported to different regions or used immediately within this region. Next, we visited the power plant which burns the methane gas. I was warned the machines were very loud. Wow, that was loud! There are two types of methane gas. Gas drawn from below the ground is of low density and can be used to generate electricity. Higher density gas is extracted above the ground and is used as car fuel, which is more profitable. So this tube here is bringing compressed natural gas into the front of the car. A lot of the engine has been modified in order to accommodate this. And the interesting thing is this gas is actually going into the back of the taxi. This is a regular taxi. You can hear the gas going into the cylinder. This cylinder here can hold between 10 to 18 cubic meters of gas, which is equivalent to 12 to 20 liters of oil. And the most attractive thing about this is that it's half the price. 1 liter of oil here in Shanxi is 7 yuan. Gas is only half that price, so it's a very attractive alternative financially for drivers.
Another example is a wind farm or a biomass project. If, for example, an investor were to come along and build a coal-fired power station in that place, then there'd be millions of tonnes of carbon being emitted into the atmosphere. What the CDM does is it tries to encourage investors to, instead of investing in a coal-fired power station, invest in a number of wind farms to replace that coal-fired power station. And so CDM encourages and incentivises investors to focus on the wind farms and the renewable energy.
That's the concept of carbon finance. So the project per se is difficult to implement because it's so high cost and it's not very good return. And the project owner considers the revenues for the future CERs. Basically now it's traded in Europe, but today it's like 13, 20 euros for spot market. Consider these extra avenues, he start to make the decision to build this project.
It seems, though, that making money from selling carbon credits may encourage companies to be more environmentally conscious, but it may not be a substitute for the overall carbon emissions problem that the world faces. After all, in order to sell methane gas, you still have to mine the coal. Shouldn't we be finding alternative sources to fuel instead? So it's back to Beijing for me to find out more answers to some of my unanswered questions, and I've chosen to take a flight. I know that that means that my carbon footprint has just skyrocketed, but what can I do? I don't really want to take the 10-hour journey back to Beijing with a bus and a train. Flying around produces a lot of carbon emissions. Airlines in China are now debating about how important carbon emissions really are, and the carbon market. The question is whether they should have to pay to offset their emissions when flying into Europe.
So the EU is taking action to address the emissions from the aviation sector generally. For all flights that go into and out of EU airports, in the future, we are looking to have a global system to tackle the aviation greenhouse gas emissions internationally at a global level.
Next year, in 2012, all Chinese airlines will have to pay to offset their carbon emissions when flying into the European Union. I went to China's Civil Aviation Administration to find out their stance.
ETS 它还没有正式的实施，但是它已经要求我们的航空公司必须加入它。
Do you think it's fair that China has to pay the European Union for offsetting its airline carbon emissions?
那么我们当然认为，如果建立在自愿的基础上，那就是公平的。但是如果是一种强制的，或者说利用某种这个行政的力量，造成了航空公司在飞往或者是离开欧洲机场的时候增加了这部分费用，我们认为是不公平的。当然，如果航空公司一定要把票价里边加入这个成分，作为非得要旅行的这个乘客来讲，他们没什么选择。但是我想说呢，这些旅客呢，他们付了钱呢，一定不是心甘，其中很多人一定不是心甘情愿的，一定会因为这件事情呢，会影响整个航空市场的需求。
Will Chinese airlines join the domestic trading market?
能不能抵消？现在欧盟并没有表态，欧盟只认为他们认可的那个市场才可以抵消。这也是我们认为欧盟 ETS 法案它的霸道的地方。
But maybe one answer to solving China's carbon emissions issue is that the country should open its own carbon market. The Chinese government has made voluntary reduction targets, aiming to reduce its carbon intensity by 45% by the year 2020. I asked Lu Zhedu, the advisor of the Asian Development Bank, on his thoughts.
It is my view that this voluntary carbon market will not work very well in future. Voluntary carbon market will work in a very small scale business, but not possible for large scale business.
碳产建立基础就是一定要有一个总量控制的这么一个目标。像欧洲，他们就是因为需要履行它的减排义务，是属于本身就有总量控制，然后他们把总量控制的这个指标呢分配到各个国家，然后由国家再分配到企业。
We spoke earlier to an advisor at the Asian Development Bank, and he said that because China's not forced to lower its carbon emissions, there's no cap in this country and there's no international policies signed. He thinks that the carbon trading market won't work in this country. What do you think?
I think that with the objectives, the targets which are in the 5-year plan, China is showing that it is serious about meeting its pledge made in the Copenhagen Accord to reduce emissions. That is a voluntary commitment, but we see that the Chinese counterparts that we are talking with are taking serious steps to develop domestic policies that will reduce emissions.
So, the Kyoto Protocol comes to an end in 2012. That's next year. The CDM mechanism only works until next year. Developing countries can only sell carbon credits until next year. The World Bank told us that the world leaders are currently discussing what might happen next year when the Kyoto Protocol expires.
So there is great uncertainty of what is going to happen after 2012, and therefore there's no idea what's going to happen with the CDM market after that year. So there's great uncertainty, and there are many people trying to figure out bridge mechanisms between now and until the time that a new agreement comes. But the word now is uncertainty.
So the world's leaders are unclear about what's going to happen to the clean development mechanism when it expires next year. As a journalist, one of the problems that we face is to show viewers like you how big this global problem actually is. Because you see, you can't see carbon emissions, you can't feel them, you can't touch them, but we breathe them in every day. Throughout this story, I hope we've shown you what China has done to tackle its own problems with carbon emissions. Could the answer be that this country opens its own domestic carbon trading market in the future? There are so many unanswered questions, but one thing's for sure, the world's leaders need to act together, think cohesively before they take the next step forward together.